How's it going, everybody? This is Matt Hubble, and I'm here with another painting demo. This one is for an album cover I made for 99Lives recently, and I have a short version on their channel, and I decided I would do a pretty long version over here on my channel. And this is the kind of video I usually do for Patreon every month. I also have a few on Gumroad. I'm going to upload a couple more probably this month. But, it's like just kind of to more, I guess, efficiently explain my process here. So, you'll see right here, I just threw in this 3D model, right? And this was just a quick way for me to block out my idea. And I guess the idea for this piece is a cyberpunk kind of robot, right? Usually when I work with these guys, they don't ask for too much in way of direction. They just, say, hey, like this month they were like, well, we need a cyberpunk piece and something that kind of feels like Blade Runner. And usually part of the rules is like we stick with a robot sort of sci-fi theme, and we make sure that the robot has pink headphones. Those are usually the only limitations they give me, which is pretty awesome. So they're like one of my favorite people to work with. So I have, that 3D model, and now I'm kind of going in. I have a really, really bad sketch, and I'm trying to figure out refining some of these ideas a little bit more. And my line art isn't great, and I'm not trying to make it great. I'm just trying to get the placement of stuff and the ideas that I want down, because afterwards I'm going to paint over this whole thing anyway. You're not going to see any lines in the finished. So for me, usually I think line art is not a waste of time, but something that, I don't need to spend a ton of time on. I've tried in the past to do good looking line art, and it's just not really my thing. I think a lot better in shapes than I do in lines. And I think that's because I've done so much more painting than I have drawing. So, a lot of times if you paint with oil paint, you think about the big masses and shapes of things rather than the outline. I just think that's kind of how my brain is wired. But either way, you can make great art no matter, which is easier for you. All right, so I'm trying to figure out a cityscape in the background. I feel like cyberpunk is really needs to have a dense city, and it's always got to be raining, right? But so I put in a perspective grid. I'm using Procreate in this, by the way, and I put in a perspective grid, and you can't see it in the time lapse, but you can do a drawing assist where you snap all your lines to perspective. And I do this a lot, especially when I'm sketching, because it makes it easy just to kind of sketch in perspective. None of these lines I'm making here make a ton of sense necessarily, but in my head I'm okay, I want a sidewalk, I want some shop fronts, some little stores that you would go in, but they're all open, there's no doors or anything on them. And maybe it's a market area or something. And so really all I'm thinking about is I want to make the entrances to all these buildings the same height, because they need to be relative to human scale, right? Things like sidewalks, doors, steps, tables, chairs, those sorts of things, all, when you're doing an environment, they all explain how tall a person should be. Steps are, I think 7 inches by 6 inches, for the rise and run. And that's a standard. You ever notice, if you walk up steps that are a weird size, you're more likely to trip. And that's because that has become a universal, at least I don't know in the United States it is, I don't know about other countries, but at least, here stairs are always the exact same size. It might differ if you get into older buildings and stuff, but it's all kind of the same. Doorways are usually 7 to 8 feet, and that doesn't really deviate. So you can kind of, if you put those things into your scene, you'll be able to figure out how big the people should be. All right, so you saw right there I had that image of a motorcycle kind of flash in. And I want like a, I don't know, kind of an off-road sort of rough, like utilitarian bike for her. I don't want her to have like a super fancy bike. So I found that and just threw it in and started like kind of just traced over it a little bit and then stretched it out and kind of drew in a bunch of my own stuff. And I'm kind of blocking in a value study right now. Just a real basic value arrangement to figure out, you know, how I want to proceed with the rest of this painting. Her head is, you know, light against dark. There's the highest contrast point in this whole image is her face against the dark background right now. And that's totally intentional. I want to make sure that she stands out. And I'm like kind of lightening the background and stuff and making her bike darker. And all of those things are so that, you know, we can get a good read on the character's silhouette. And that's about the stage that I usually send off to people to get like revisions and things. So I think on this project, we only had a couple little changes. So after they got back to me, then that's when I start the line art. I don't usually do like, you know, the finished sort of cleaner level of drawing until I know I'm good to go, because otherwise I'm just wasting time. So if you have a client, it's better to show them more iteration and more steps rather than less, because you don't want them to, you just want to be on the same page with them. I was trying to figure out like a cool boot too. I wanted to sort of mix like, I wanted some sort of, I guess, motorcycle boot, but I also wanted to kind of feel like those shoes from Back to the Future a little. That's like my staple for like sci-fi. But, you know, in the end, I kind of found a bunch of reference for boots and then mixed them together. You know, like the cool straps and all those things. Don't be afraid to use a lot of reference as well. You know, each of these things I found a reference that was probably about like 75% of this pose of, you know, it's kind of mixed with that one with the dirt bike there. But then there's another one of a girl on a bike in that kind of a pose right there from that like 3/4 angle, like she's looking back towards you. And, you know, you don't have to use just one piece of reference. Using like, sometimes it's like, oh, I like the shoulders. I can't figure out how to paint her shoulders. Okay, well, find something where somebody's turning like that. And you can kind of stitch things together in your head. Also, you know, it gets easier and easier as you have a better understanding of anatomy and drawing. I think, you know, reference will take you like 70% of the way. But then there's a lot of it, like if you are combining different reference things, you need to be able to know how to draw and like how to stitch those things all together. I think probably the best book that I ever read on drawing was Byrne Hogarth and Dynamic Anatomy, I think is the name of it. It was like a blue, I remember it was blue and had like yellow writing on it, and it's got like kind of a character moving forward in 3D space. So if you find that, he's got a couple other books too, but that was the one that I read through like a million times when I was younger, and it really helped with dealing with foreshortening and perspective with anatomy. So it's definitely worth checking out. You can probably get them, I don't know, they probably have some at the library for free too. So, all right, so right there I just dropped in an image, right? I found kind of this like Blade Runner image that I thought had really cool colors, and I just blurred it all out and just slammed it in the background. I know I think I started doing that. I watched a bunch of like Feng Zhu's tutorials on YouTube, and that guy's he's a machine. And I noticed that was one way that he would start sometimes with his painting. And I think it's because, at least for me, when I paint traditionally, it's the hardest part is when you don't have like a ground and like a background to work on. And, you know, it carries over into digital stuff too. Like if you have like a base of just color, it doesn't have to be right. It just has to be like something kind of like what you're after. Then it helps you judge all of your other color decisions, right? Because color is completely relative. Like blue next to orange, is going to look like really vibrant. But if you have, let's say, orange and like gray, the gray all of a sudden looks blue, just because the way your brain like sees color. So you have to understand, like, you don't have to have like blue and orange. You could have, blue and desaturated blue or whatever. And then especially with complements, this works really well, where you get like these, I guess relative color is the best term for it, right? But you don't have to have like fully saturated colors, and it usually looks better if you don't. I think the more gray a color is, the better they communicate with each other, right? So as things move towards gray, they're all becoming closer together and more related, and they usually work better together. So long story short, when you throw in an image like this, you can start to build off of that and figure out the colors that you actually want. You might not want really any of the colors, except like in this one, like maybe I only want blue. Well, everything that I build off of that blue color now like makes sense in relation to the rest of the piece. And this is also why I like to paint my background before I paint my character, because the character is sitting in the background. The background's the more important piece from the color perspective. Once the colors are nailed in and sort of locked down for the background, then it's so much easier. Like, I usually just take the character, use the same sort of colors, but like slightly warm them up, because when things get closer to you, they also get warmer generally, just because of like atmospheric perspective and stuff. So that is always a little helpful hint if you want things to feel like they're integrated. I know a lot of times people like to just paint characters because they're the most fun thing for a lot of people. But I think if you can hold off and do your background first, you're going to end up with a way stronger piece. Because a lot of times once people paint that character, then they kind of lose steam, and the background suffers because of it. So I had some buildings in the background, and they weren't cutting it. They felt a little too like present day sort of modern style. So, I was looking at Blade Runner, and everything's so foggy. So I was like, I'm just going to do like some really simple silhouetted buildings with like a couple lines here and there and dots for windows, and just keep it simple, because there's going to be so much other activity and interest in this painting that those buildings are really just there as a way to darken the background and make sure that the character like reads really well. I'm kind of just fogging up the bottom of the buildings in the back, and then on another layer in front, I have that separate layer of buildings. So I have like my background layer, my building layer, and then my second building layer. And now I'm starting in on these little shop fronts, and for me, these were kind of the most fun part of the painting. I just used a round brush, like a hard round brush for most of it, and I just kind of scribbled, and it's like finding a shape in the clouds where you just kind of see something and like let your brain go for it and like latch onto it. It's almost like, I don't know, it's a really freeing way to draw. Like, you don't feel like you're tied into like, I have to draw this thing. You're just like, well, let's see what happens. Like, what's in here? So I don't know. I figured this guy right now is maybe he's at like a little restaurant. I thought maybe it was like a fish market or something. Had like those blue lights in there. Remind me of like something sterile, like a grocery store or like something like that. So this side, I don't know. I've got a guy walking up the steps, a couple other guys looking down at a table maybe, and then some like, weird hanging lights inside of there. And then I'm going to put in like this big dude. I thought maybe he was wearing a big, like, not a space suit, but maybe he's like from a different planet or something, and he's trading there, or maybe maybe he's not human. Maybe he's some other type of creature. And that might be pushing a little bit outside of the sci-fi or the cyberpunk realm, maybe, because cyberpunk tends to just be like an earthbound kind of a thing, but there's no rules. I just thought it was cool. I was also kind of thinking a little bit about, the Baron in Dune for some reason. I think maybe because he's such a big creature. Which, if you guys haven't read Dune, I don't know. You got to do it. Do it before the movie comes out, at least. Because it could ruin it. Or it could be good. I don't know. But the book is amazing. I'm guessing most of you who are on my channel are like me and are into like sci-fi and all of these other nerdy things. It's my favorite sort of genre of anything. So sci-fi and fantasy. I can't get enough of it. So yeah, I'm kind of just blocking it. And like when you look at these characters, there's nothing to them, right? They're just globs. But when you zoom out like that, then they're reading as people. They have silhouettes. They have, and really the key is making sure that like the head shape is the right size for like the rest of the body. And then your brain is instantly going to just pick that up and know that, oh, this is a human. So I've got a couple more people on the street here. I'm trying to figure out what to do. You'll have somebody sitting on the steps there. This part's really fun because I just turn on some music and just relax. It's really relaxing while I'm painting these things because there's no expectations, I think. Getting up into the building. One thing I should mention, a lot of times, I would say almost always with every brush I have, really, I add hue jitter to it. So you can take your brush. I have my brushes too on Gumroad or my website if you want to just use the ones that I use, but you can make them too. So I have, basically hue jitter set up on each brush, but only a little bit, like 7-8% usually. And that helps to just vary the color a little bit and make it feel more natural. If you stick with the same color over and over, everything starts to feel really digital and really plastic and fake. Because even when you're doing an oil painting, you're mixing and remixing and constantly getting different color variations. So I'm also, I made a little grunge brush and I just put some grunge down and then I just transformed it into perspective back there for that sign area. I also make sure, and I don't have a lot of layers right now, right? I have those background buildings and I have my main character on her bike, and then I have like the cityscape, and those are pretty much the different layers that I have. So I tried to keep it pretty minimal. I feel like when I get too many layers, things just get needlessly complicated. And, in the past, I used to keep all my layers going and active. And it was, the reason was that I'd want to be able to save and retain anything in case I needed to change it. These days, I think it's faster if I just repaint or paint over something a lot of the time. So when I have a bunch of layers, it actually just slows me down because I end up trying to figure out what layer I'm working on, what layer I'm needing to work on, and shuffling around too much. So I like to keep it simpler. And if I'm really concerned about something that might need to be updated or changed, I just save another copy of my file and then I flatten it down because I don't want to deal with the too many layers. So, and it's especially bad in Procreate just because you do have layer limits so that the program doesn't crash on an iPad, which is really smart. And I am really glad they do it because Procreate never crashes. But it also means that you have to be a little more conscious and aware of the how many layers you're using. So, all right. So this section, I don't know, it was like pink and it reminded me of like maybe a bar or something. And I figured what cyberpunk scene isn't complete without like some type of strip club situation, right? There's always something in every cyberpunk movie. So we got, there's gonna be just like a couple girls hanging out in there, and then like a big gnarly bouncer who looks like an executioner, just waiting out front. I think honestly, I just went to it just because I found a couple shapes that looked like feminine, and I was like, all right, let's put that in there. But yeah, and then I'm gonna have a noodle stand here on the left side coming up next. So and really, yeah, I mean, I kind of, you see like the girl we're gonna now, I kind of drew a little bit of her like outline and stuff, and then it's mostly just that round brush, just really simply blocking in stuff. Like it's really, really nothing there. It's amazing to me how little you can get away with when you're working on something, and like what your brain can just sort of pick up and realize without you like really defining it all. And to me, I mean, that's almost like the entire key to art. And it's going to get deep now, because like when you think of like when I see stuff like Greg Manchus or John Sear Sargent, those types of artists have hit this level where it's like almost the less marks they make, the better it looks. And I don't know how they do it, but simplifying your shapes is like, it's so much more elegant. And so I think that's my eventual goal, is to get things down to like a way where they're really simplified, and it's more about the lighting and the edges and not so much about the drawing. I don't know if that makes sense, but I guess that's kind of the goal. So this noodle stand I kind of made as an homage to Decker from Blade Runner. There's a scene where he goes and gets noodles, and he gets towards the beginning of the movie, and I don't know, I just thought it'd be fun to throw in there. So kind of indicating like at the top, we've got like maybe some pots hanging. There's like a line where like food would sit, and maybe some overhead lights, some lights back in the kitchen, and just keeping it really simple. And then, with like the pots and stuff, it's like, well, you just add like a couple little dots to indicate like some specularity and some shininess. And sure, I mean it reads to me. So this final room is I was thinking of like, maybe it's like a internet cafe kind of a thing, or maybe it's like it's for like VR or like hackers, or I don't know. So there's like more wires, everything's kind of got like a more green feel to it. A lot of these rooms are just based on like the color, right? Like what do I feel with each color? Like the noodles, it's like more of a yellow. The hacker room is more of a greenish blue, because that feels like computers to me. So there's not really like a bunch of, there's not really like a lot of deep planning or rhyme or reason. It's just kind of how I'm feeling while I'm drawing. And this whole background just feels like I'm hanging out doodling. That's like I said, there's just not really any pressure, which is nice. And I should do more stuff like that because it's really fun. And I'm just kind of defining a couple little neon signs and stuff, because what cyberpunk world is not complete without neon? I think pretty soon coming up, I'm going to take this whole background layer, and I'm going to duplicate it, and I'm going to flip it vertically. And that's how I'll end up getting a bunch of reflections and stuff in the ground. But that might not come up for here for a little bit. And then I didn't want any actual like English words or anything in there. I wanted it just to be like some sort of hieroglyphic sort of like symbolism and stuff that's not, I don't want it to like it. Text is really distracting, I guess. You know, if you have an actual word in your painting, that's going to be what people focus on. They'll focus on that over a person's face even. So unless it's the absolute like most important thing, I try not to do it too often. So this section of the building is just kind of like gray, greebly sci-fi stuff, which I always like. Maybe I should have done more of that throughout the whole thing because I like the way that looks a lot. It reminds me of like Star Wars or I guess Blade Runner 2. Yeah, and a lot of this, like, so I'll use that perspective assist for a lot of it, but then I do like to turn it off as well because I don't want it to feel too straight and sterile and lined up and stuff. So just more little weird signs and things just to kind of fill the space to make it feel a little bit more alive. So I snuck my name in there on that last sign and then kind of changed it all so you couldn't read it. I was running out of ideas. You'll notice too with the background, I'm trying as much as I can to like work around in a circle. I don't want to stay and like really refine one section all by itself. Kind of want to bring it up, like work a little bit over here, work a little bit over there, and kind of bring it all up together. All right, now we're moving on to the main character. It looks like right now I'm thinking about some bounce light because she's feeling a little too dark. So I added a little bit of like ambient occlusion. Some areas where it's going to be darker, like in her armpit or like underneath her jacket, places where light's not going to really reach. And then I'm adding this greenish sort of bounce light. And she's got these like leather pants on, which are kind of shiny. So you have to be a little bit more aware that like, you know, your highlights are going to be a little brighter and they're going to be next to the darker areas and kind of butted up right against the dark. And there's going to be a little more contrast in them. So at this point, I'm kind of still adjusting background stuff. Nothing like crazy, just I think I wanted the ground to be a little darker and, you know, a couple little bit more details and cleaning up some edges, really, because like some of them are pretty soft. Like I said, a lot of this is just kind of like noodling, just kind of cleaning stuff up. It's nice to have a variation of like hard edges and soft edges, because if they're all kind of too soft, things will start to look mushy. So it is good to go back and kind of clean up some of that. Okay, here we go. I'm going to flip that now. So I duplicated that layer and I just flipped it. And then I'm going to kind of warp it and adjust it a little bit so that it fits my perspective lines. And then later I'll add in like asphalt and stuff on top of it so that it looks like there's puddles. All right, so moving on to this main robot. I had a pretty good idea of how I wanted her to look once I started drawing. And this is why the drawing is important, because you'll notice that it doesn't change very much from my drawing. I nailed down where I wanted everything and the sort of general shapes of everything. And I'm not going to deviate too far from that. The big changes should usually come while you're drawing and not while you're painting, because when you have to change, I don't know, the whole design of her helmet, like it's going to be easier when it's a drawing rather than when it's a fully rendered painting. If you want to save time and paint faster, try to do your adjustments early. With that said, though, sometimes things just look wrong when you start painting them, and then you do have to go back and adjust. So I also wanted, I don't know, I like robots in human clothes because I feel like it kind of, I don't know, adds a little more story, right? She's not just a robot, she's a thinking, feeling machine. More book recommendations. Any Isaac Asimov book. He's all about artificial intelligence and robots, and the movie I, Robot was based off of his book. Really cool stuff. So what I'm doing is I kind of get the basic shape that I want, right, and the form, and then hit the details on top of that. So you're trying to think big to small. You don't want to, say on her head, for instance, you don't want to render each little section and then, put in all these little details as you're going. You want to get the big form changes. Make sure her head feels like a nice round, egg shape. And then I broke it up into the different panels and put in the cut lines. And then after that, I'm going to put in more highlights. And then after that, I'm going to put in dents and scratches and scuffs and all these things. And it's really important to do that because that's how you get your character to look like it's in 3D space. It'd be almost impossible, I think, just to start noodling on these little things and get all the values right over the course of that whole plane change and actually have it work. So and I'm trying to figure out I need some kind of rim light or something on this too. And I know it's kind of contrived and probably not realistic, but it's just going to help her character pop more. And it's going to help with making things feel shinier and more sci-fi too. Her elbow's feeling a little weird to me right now with the way the cloth is and the way the coat's bending. So I know I'm going to hit that up eventually. And I always find leather is a weird thing to paint. It's a weird texture. So once again, don't be afraid if you're working on something, get that reference. And you could just have anything to reference that. As long, it could be a leather coat, leather pants, boots, just so you get the right specularity and sort of texture on it that you're looking for, and just practice that. I know I've watched at one point I saw, I think it was Brad Rigney. He would, if he didn't know how to paint a certain material, he would do a study of just that. So he would stop his painting, open a new document, and find a piece, say a piece of leather, and he would try to replicate that specularity and all that stuff. So that way it becomes part of his mental library that he can then just make it up and do it on his own. I think studying like that is probably the best way to do it. It's super practical. So yeah, okay, on the head now I'm adding in all these scratches and dents and marks, and that's on a new layer just because it makes it easier. And then once I like it, then I flatten it back down. So I don't keep that layer alive. Once I'm satisfied with it, I just smash them into each other. Also, if you're working on she's on her own layer, right? So you could duplicate her, turn off the one underneath, and then just work directly on that layer. That way you have a backup. So when you're doing something that you're not totally comfortable with, or you're not sure it's going to look good, that's another way to do it too. So I'm fighting right now with the values of the coat against the values of the arm. I feel like that arm isn't reading super well yet because there's a lot of contrast because she has a white colored metal or exosuit. I don't know what it is. But then the coat is a dark color. So I'm trying to figure out, like, I need contrast. I need light against dark really to make that look right. So I kind of put that light color back there and left it alone for a little bit. And then I'm going to go back in and, now I'm working on that elbow to try to fix that and get that to look a little bit more, like, have it read a little bit better. And so when you see that flash, like the coat just flashed, that's me turning off the layer that I was working on and judging it against the previous iteration before I made those changes, making sure I like it, then I flatten it down. So I dulled that green a little bit, and I feel like it's sticking out better, like the hand looks better now. So I'm going to move on to the pants. Kind of that back, the back wasn't the center of her back was kind of like offset, and it made her torso look like too thick. So we had to kind of tweak that a little bit too. But I didn't do enough, I guess I didn't do enough research on like her weapon holster. So I will go back through while I'm painting and kind of adjust that. You'll notice like the variation in colors and stuff though. And that's totally intentional. There's like, this leather's kind of shiny, so it's going to pick up some surrounding colors. So I have those greens, blues. I even have some red and pink in there. I try to keep the highlight color a consistent temperature and then the shadow color kind of a consistent temperature. But I think bouncing around and playing with color throughout is a lot of fun. It adds a little more interest to your painting. Because I could have made your pants all that one basic hue, right? Like if you turn this grayscale, they're probably going to be pretty similar. But it just wouldn't have the life that it has now. See, I'm trying to figure out her torso. Like, does she have like a section where, it would kind of bump out a little bit for her ribs? Or, like how would like that stomach work when it was like twisting? So in the end, it doesn't have to be right. It just has to like look okay and not look broken, right? So as an artist, you can still BS a lot of it and sort of fudge your way in and out of it. But you should try to think about like how things work, and you'll end up with a stronger drawing. That little notch on her forearm, I think I put in there because they had some reference to the Mandalorian, and he's got that little section on his forearm that shoots out missiles and stuff, and I just like the shape of it, so decided to add that in. And this one was kind of tricky just because lighting her, it's kind of like she should be lit from our right side at like a kind of a high angle right now, right? But then I also wanted to really kind of emphasize some bounce light coming up. So if you notice on her left side, like on her arm or chest, all that stuff, I added like a really bright light. And that helps to kind of round out the character, pop some of the forms. But it's all just like contrived, like garbage, right? It's not actual realistic lighting, but it looks cool. So at some point you can take liberties with how you light things. I know a lot of artists will say that you shouldn't, and I think that they're right for like 90% of it. The more realistic and accurate your lighting is, the better it's going to look. But then if you're doing something that's like off the wall, like this like sci-fi cartoon kind of stuff, then why you can add in some more dramatic lighting and stuff. I mean, they do that in movies all the time too, right? They don't have that perfect lighting naturally. They've got reflectors and lights off of camera and all sorts of stuff happening to make it look good. So even if let's say you have reference, right, and you got kind of the right light, you can still embellish that. And you shouldn't be afraid to. You just have to understand how and why. You have to have a reason. So as I'm drawing this gun, I'm pretty sure I was looking up some reference from Destiny, because for me, I think that game has some of the best weapon designs I've ever seen. They're really varied. They feel like realistic and grounded though, but they still have like a cool sci-fi vibe to them. So every time I'm painting sci-fi guns, I usually look up their stuff. One of my friends who I used to work with, I know he was a modeler for Destiny 2, and I know he worked on a bunch of the weapons. I don't know if he did any know if he concepted any of it or if he just modeled them, but yeah, all that stuff is crazy good. So there, I've kind of redesigned her holster so that it actually makes sense, and it's not just like randomly sitting on these straps on her leg. And still, I don't know if it makes total sense, right? Like how else? It's got to be connected somehow to like maybe the cloth on her pants too. Like maybe there's a tie on the like her thigh that she like ties the top of the holster to so that it doesn't slide down. I don't know. That's how a lot of like medieval armor works. It'll have straps, but then it has ties to like the gambeson underneath. So why can't that could carry on to sci-fi stuff too, right? They're all kind of the same. So now she's almost done, right? I've got a little bit more on her boots to do, a little bit more on her arm. But it's almost time to move on to the bike. And the bike was probably the most terrifying part of this painting for me. I think I usually wait. I was a little worried about working on it, so I waited. And I mean, that's okay. Sometimes it's better to wait for the hard part, build up your confidence on the painting, and then you can attack it. Or sometimes it's better to hit it first, because then the rest of the painting's easy. I don't know. I really like how her boots turned out, though. They definitely feel like motorcycle boots to me. She just feels like she's pretty badass. So getting into this bike, I mean, a lot of it, it's just pretty simple. I have, I photo bashed a little bit of like the engine stuff in there at the bottom, and then I'm just going to kind of paint over it and adjust things so that they have a little bit more of a sci-fi vibe. I changed the tailpipes and, added some stuff from various bikes. And I know if there's anybody out there who knows anything about motorcycles and engines, they're probably like, this is this is so messed up and wrong because I don't know. I don't understand like every part and piece on an engine. It's not really my thing because I usually don't paint a ton of vehicles. But I mean, once I got to about this part, I was like, okay, I think it looks pretty cool and I think I'm having fun. But up until that, you're like, what am I doing? And I could have gone for like I don't know, like a really wild design. But then I feel like maybe it wouldn't have that same sort of motorcycle vibe that I was going for. And obviously, if I had more time, I probably would have like iterated on a few different designs and stuff. But you know, sometimes you just gotta get stuff done. I think we're getting fairly close to the end of this, actually. No, maybe not. Got a little bit more to go. About 3/4. I made sure to slow down at the end. There's a bunch of effects and stuff like rain and glow and all these things, and they're all going to fly by really fast. So I tried to slow down that part of the video as much as possible, but it's still going to be kind of fast. The way Procreate works, it's like every time you add an adjustment, it's just like one little thing. So but I'm gonna try to finish up this bike and wrap up all the little bits. I just want some shiny pieces in there so that it feels like an actual motorcycle. And then I'm gonna add some like exhaust and stuff coming out the back, just to make it feel like it's a little more alive. I'm going to beat up the bike a little bit, not as much as probably her. But I got to grunge it out a little. I don't want it to be too perfect looking. And so probably, I think it's on a new layer that I separated those heads, and I'll drop them back in and paint on top of them here after the bike is done. Here we go. Here come the robots now. And these I just kept pretty simple. Like somewhat similar to her design, but not quite. Just so that they feel like maybe they're variations on, you know, other types of robots in the world. So I just duplicated the other head, flipped it, and then repainted the face. So that way they felt kind of consistent. They also have kind of consistent eye colors throughout all three, just so that they read. You know, if you don't do that, it can be just like a little distracting. You're almost creating like a visual shorthand. You know, like They all have red eyes and kind of like bluish gray, like metal. Added some sort of little like fishnet kind of thing that she just stuffs them in, throws them out over the side of her bike. And then a little bit of a shadow layer. It's kind of that ambient occlusion idea again. And then here comes some little scratches and dings and stuff on the bike, so it doesn't feel too fancy. But I almost envision this bike as like something like, I'm trying to think of a good movie example. But like, let's say this is, her baby, and she's, like customized it, and it's like her sleeper, it's just ugly, but it's got, some sort of massive engine in it that she can run down all these dudes with, and it's just like ultra awesome. But you wouldn't necessarily know by seeing it. Because you don't want to be too flashy, when you're a bounty hunter. You want to be able to get in there, sneak up on them, right? These are all little things that pop into my head while I'm working on these. Like, you come up with these little stories in your head. And I think that makes a more complete and compelling character when you can do that. All right, so I think we're onto the section now where I've got more of the effect stuff happening. Like, most of the painting is done, and now it's on to the final touches to kind of bring it home. So I was messing with some pink exhaust, but it just felt maybe a little too over the top. So now I'm going to just do a light color. And usually I block it in more opaque. It's on a new layer, right? And then I just use a brush and kind of draw it in and then smudge it out around like that to get those hard edges and stuff. And once I'm satisfied with that, I'll usually drop down the opacity a little bit so that it's not so thick. But keeping it on another layer helps so that you can do all that. Yep, see, and that kind of erased out a little bit. All right, so that right there, I drew those puddle shapes, one giant puddle shape, and then just transformed it into perspective. And then I took the liquify tool on my reflected layer and kind of followed that as a guide on like how it should ripple. And then I turned my ripple, I blurred it, and I set it to screen. Okay, now I'm working on like that sort of ground fog that comes in when it's raining. So I have like a little brush that's got little dots and stuff on it to make it feel like tiny little bits of rain. And you really only want to hit that in like your highlight areas. You don't need it in the shadows because you don't really ever see it. You can only see the rain when it's like reflecting or refracting. Now I'm just hand drawing in some really big raindrops. I'll do some more of those too. And then I'll also just draw on the character, like around the character, like the raindrops like bouncing off and stuff too. I think with rain though, you don't need as much rain as you think you do. You just need it like in the right spots. It's like around your really bright lights. You want to be able to see the rain. So my ground layer with the reflection and stuff, I think I'm gonna flatten and add a mask to. And then I'm gonna like erase out with the mask basically sections where there's gonna be dry pavement. And so that might come up really quick here. Just working on those little raindrops. And those are just a round brush. I'm just using little circles, little dots, just to plop them all in. You only need a few. And it's better to do by hand. If you try to like make a brush for it or something, I think sometimes that's more trouble than it's worth. I mean, putting in those dots took me like a minute. remember too, rain is not always all the same direction. If it's windy, different drops will go in different directions too. So if you vary that a little bit, keep them going, 80% the same way. But you can vary that tilt a little bit too, to kind of get a little bit more of a realistic rain feel. If you notice on the right too, I also have sections where water is dripping or running off of the buildings. Gotta do a little bit on our bike too. And I'm gonna mess with trying to have like water running down her clothing and stuff, but okay, so that's a new layer right there with rain. And then I was just transforming it into position to see if that would look better, but I kind of liked the way I had it, so. Okay, just put in a few highlights here in the water. Okay, that thing that I just did, that was my grunge layer. Transformed it into perspective. And then, so I didn't use a mask, I just set it on top as black. And then I'm going to kind of paint around it and see how it feels like you get kind of that pavement feeling out of it now, but like some parts are reflective where maybe there's little dips and stuff where water's collecting and there's puddles. Because if it was all just one big puddle, it wouldn't make any sense. It would just look just kind of weird. So I'm just messing with like glows and like little atmosphere things and trying to dial it all in. And it's tricky because you don't want to overdo it. And I thought maybe I should blur out the background too, but then I didn't really want to because I put so much time into it. Gotta have like each of these shops has gotta have like some steam and stuff coming out of it too. So, and that little square that keeps flashing up, I needed to make sure this image would fit in a square as well as be 16 by 9. So, it's kind of a constraint for the composition. Then we got some cool searchlights in the back, and it's almost there. So, oh yeah, a little warp action there around her exhaust to make it feel like it's hot. A little heat warp. What else we got going on? Not much, just some little glows still. You can tell like this part of the process, it goes pretty quick, but sometimes it doesn't just because like, or what I'll do is I'll do it and then I'll put it away and I'll come back the next day and look at it. I'm like, oh, those glows are too strong. We gotta adjust that. And, it's nice to have a couple extra days when you're working on something to set it aside, stop looking at it, and then come back and see what your brain picks up on as being like too much. I keep flicking on layers on and off to see like, does it look better without it? Like just because I put it in doesn't mean that it was a good choice. Added a vignette. Okay, in this part, this is kind of the last thing I do. I just set a brush with saturation set to 100% and I kind of block in just this crazy thing on a new layer. Then I'm going to blur it out, set it to color mode, and then drop it to like 5%. And all that does is add like a nice little variation in color throughout the scene, and which also helps to kind of make it feel less digital and less a little more like nuanced color to make it feel a little more realistic, I guess. So, yep, I took out that smoke in the front. I think it was just a little too strong. And a lot of it is like trying to just pull focus right to the main character. So a lot of these things I'm fuzzing out and adding all this like steamy atmosphere and stuff, and that's all just a way for me to try to get your eye to look at the main character. It's like the whole goal every time for every painting. Neon needs some glow. It's always tricky to like figure out how much and to not like go crazy and really overdo it. So yeah, I don't know if you guys stuck around for this long. We're over an hour, I think. So, like I said, you know, these are the kind of videos I put on Patreon every month. If you into that, come sign up because I'll give you last month's and this month's usually. So, they're, I don't know, they're fun and hopefully they help a little bit. But if not, you can always just go buy them on Gumroad too. I'll put them up there. Or you can just hang out on my YouTube channel because I still post shorter videos on here. And yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this and maybe learned a little bit. But you know, let me know, leave a comment, and you know, let me know what you think. All right, thanks guys.